Welcome to the channel as we start another story from the Creepy Tales playlist. In the darkness, stories take shape. Some are whispered from the shadows. Others echo from places you should never go. These are the echoes of the unknown. Tales of horror, suspense, and fear that lingers. Because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones you can't explain. The ones you don't want to know exist. Let's begin. Debra's alarm hummed softly on the nightstand, a faint, muted vibration that pulled her from a dreamless sleep. 4:30 a.m. The house was a silent void, heavy with the thick, quiet darkness of early morning. Michael slept beside her, his slow, steady breathing a faint comfort. She slipped out of bed carefully, her bare feet cold against the carpet. The hallway stretched empty, shadows clinging to the corners. A faint glow seeped from under Brian's door, his night light, a small reassurance. The bathroom light was a sharp, sterile brightness against the darkness outside. Debra squinted, her reflection pale, her hair a tangled mess. She began her routine: warm water, a splash to her face, the quiet shuffle of skincare bottles against the sink. But as she leaned closer to the mirror, patting moisturizer along her cheeks, she froze. A faint sound, so soft she almost missed it. A distant click. A brief, gentle tap, like a door settling somewhere in the house. Debra's eyes flicked to the bathroom door, the pale light spilling into the hallway. But the darkness was thick still. Silence pressed against her ears. She shook it off, forcing a smile. It's just the house settling. Old wood, cold air. Nothing more. But as she brushed her hair, the quiet seemed heavier, the shadows pressing against the thin crack beneath the door. Her hairbrush whispered through her tangled curls, the faint crackle of static a soft, steady comfort. But then she heard it again, a faint rustling, like dry leaves scraping against the window. Her eyes drifted to the door. The darkness beyond seemed thicker now, pressing closer, a pale, empty void. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself. But her voice was too quiet, too thin. She forced a smile, focusing on her reflection, dark circles beneath her eyes, skin pale beneath the harsh light. She dabbed at her cheek with concealer, the soft tap-tap of the sponge a steady rhythm. But the rustling didn't stop. Faint, slow, like something brushing against the hallway wall. Her fingers tightened around the brush, her pulse a faint, quick beat in her ears. "Michael?" she called out, her voice louder now. Silence. The hallway was an empty void, the darkness swallowing the pale glow of the bathroom light. But the rustling continued, faint, rhythmic, like dry leaves dragged across the wall. Her heart raced, her eyes locked on the door. But nothing moved. No shadow. No sound beyond that slow, steady rustle. She laughed nervously, her voice thin and brittle. "It's just the house." But she couldn't shake the cold knot twisting in her chest. Debra set the brush aside, her fingers trembling. The rustling had stopped. But now a new sound replaced it, a slow, deliberate shuffle. Faint, but clear. Like something brushing against the hallway wall. Her eyes locked on the door, the pale light reflecting against the dark hallway. "Maybe it's Brian," she whispered, but his door was closed, the soft glow of his night light seeping beneath the frame. He never woke this early. The shuffling grew louder, a slow, rhythmic drag that seemed to slide along the wall, then pause. Her breath quickened, her pulse racing. "Michael?" she called again, her voice a weak, desperate whisper. But the house remained silent, the darkness thick. She reached for her phone, its cold glass a small comfort. But the screen was dark, dead. Battery drained. Panic twisted in her chest. She leaned closer to the door, her ear inches from the cold wood. Silence. But then the shuffling resumed, louder, deliberate, just outside the door. Her knees felt weak, her fingers white against the cold porcelain of the sink. "It's nothing, just the house," she whispered, but her voice was a faint, desperate plea. The cold air pressed against her skin, sharp and stinging. Debra stared at the door, her breath quick and shallow. And then she saw it, the handle. A faint, slow twitch. Just a slight, hesitant turn. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "No, no, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. But the handle twitched again, a slow, deliberate twist. It was locked, she was sure of it. But still, it moved. Her knees threatened to buckle, her back pressing against the sink. Her phone remained dark, the screen a useless black mirror. Her eyes flicked to the mirror, her own reflection pale, wide-eyed, her breath fogging the glass. The handle stopped, hanging still. Silence. A thick, smothering quiet that pressed against her ears. But then the shuffling returned, closer now, slow and deliberate, just outside the door. Her hands shook, her voice a faint, choked whisper. "Michael, please wake up." But the darkness beyond the door seemed to lean closer, pressing against the thin crack of light. The light overhead flickered, a faint buzz, then steadied. Debra leaned against the sink, her knees weak, her pulse a frantic rhythm. Her eyes stayed locked on the door, the pale crack beneath it a thin line of darkness. The shuffling stopped. Silence. Thick, heavy. Her breath slowed, her gaze flicking to her phone, still dead. "It's nothing, just a bad morning, just the house," she whispered, forcing a weak, shaky smile. But the air felt colder now, a faint, sharp chill pressing against her arms. The mirror fogged again, her reflection a pale, ghostly blur. Her fingers gripped the sink, her knuckles white. And then she heard it, a faint, dull thud. Heavy. Muffled. Like something shifting in the hallway. Her voice was a thin, desperate whisper. "Michael? Michael, wake up!" But the house remained silent. Her gaze stayed locked on the door, her pulse racing. The darkness beyond was still, the pale light a thin, fragile line. But it felt closer now, pressing against the door. Her fingers slid to the lock, twisting it again, secure. But even as she breathed a faint sigh of relief, the cold air grew sharper, her skin prickling with fear. Silence gripped the bathroom, thick and smothering. Debra leaned against the sink, her breath a faint, quick gasp. But then it came, a low, dull thud. A heavy, muffled sound, like something stepping quietly but deliberately in the hallway. Her heart raced, her pulse a frantic drumbeat against her chest. Another thud, slow, deliberate. Her eyes locked on the door, the thin line of darkness beneath it an empty void. "Michael?" she whispered, her voice cracking. But the darkness didn't answer. The footsteps continued, slow, dragging. One step. Then another. Each one a soft, muted impact that seemed to press against her ears. Her knees trembled, her fingers tightening against the cold porcelain of the sink. The darkness beneath the door seemed to shift, a faint, pale shadow stretching across the floor, then vanishing. The footsteps stopped. Silence settled, suffocating. But she knew it was still there, just outside the door. Waiting. The overhead light trembled, a faint, steady buzz. Debra's eyes darted to the ceiling, her reflection a pale, distorted blur in the flickering glow. The shadows danced, stretching across the mirror, her own wide, terrified eyes staring back at her. The light steadied, but the cold grew sharper, sinking into her skin. Her fingers were numb, her breath a faint, visible mist. The mirror fogged again, but the steam twisted into faint, swirling shapes, almost like fingers, clawing at the glass. Her phone remained dead, a useless weight in her palm. "Please, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. But the house was silent. The darkness beneath the door seemed thicker, pressing closer. The light flickered again, the pale glow stuttering. And in that brief darkness, she thought she saw something, just behind her reflection. A faint, shadowy shape, too thin, too tall. But when the light returned, she was alone. A faint, slow scratching echoed from the hallway. Debra's breath caught, her pulse a sharp, painful beat. The sound was soft, deliberate, like claws dragging against the wall. It moved, sliding along the outside of the door, slow and steady. Her gaze stayed locked on the door, her back pressed against the cold tiles. The scratching continued, a slow, rhythmic scrape. But then it stopped. Silence. She leaned forward, her breath a faint, trembling rasp. Nothing. But then it came again, faster this time, like something trying to claw its way in. Her fingers fumbled for the cabinet beneath the sink, pulling out a small bottle of hairspray. Useless, but it felt like something. "Stop, please stop," she whispered, her voice cracking. But the scratching grew louder, more frantic, a faint, desperate scraping against the door. The cold air felt sharper now, her skin prickling, her breath visible in the freezing room. The scratching stopped, but the silence was worse. Debra's breath came in short, sharp gasps, her gaze fixed on the door. But then the handle twitched, a slow, faint movement. Her knees buckled, but she forced herself to stand, the hairspray clutched in her trembling hand. The handle twisted again, a slow, deliberate turn. But the lock held, the metal bolt cold and secure. Relief washed over her, but only for a moment. The handle turned again, more forceful now, a slow, steady pressure that never quite broke the lock. "Michael?" she whispered, her voice a choked, desperate rasp. But the house was silent. Her own pulse was a frantic drumbeat in her ears. The handle fell still, hanging limp. But then a faint, low rustling returned, just outside the door. A slow, rhythmic shuffle, like something pacing back and forth. Her legs felt weak, her fingers white against the cold metal of the sink. Debra's breath trembled, her knees pressed against her chest, her back against the cold tiles. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Her eyes never left the door, the pale line of darkness beneath it an empty void. But then she saw it, a faint, pale mist drifting beneath the door. Her heart seized, her breath a rapid, shallow gasp. The mist twisted, curling like smoke, then dissipated. But the cold grew sharper, her skin prickling, the air heavy with a damp, earthy scent. She leaned forward, her breath fogging the air. But then she heard it, a faint, slow breath. Not her own. Low, almost wet, like something struggling to breathe. Her pulse hammered, her eyes wide. The breath came again, slow, rasping, a faint, ragged inhale. Her fingers tightened around the hairspray can, her grip shaking. Her voice was a faint, desperate whisper. "Please, please leave." But the breath continued steady, just beyond the door. The faint, ragged breath continued, soft, wet, just beyond the door. Debra's fingers tightened around the cold hairspray can, her knees drawn to her chest. The mist beneath the door had vanished, but the air felt thick, cold, pressing against her. But then it changed. The slow, rasping breath twisted, becoming something else, a faint, distorted murmur. A whisper. Too quiet to understand, but there, pressed against the other side of the door. Debra's ears strained, her breath caught in her chest. The whisper rose, a faint, rhythmic mutter, like words clawing at the edge of speech but never forming. A low, wet rasp that grew louder, pressing against the thin wood. "No, no, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her knees pressed tighter against her chest, her gaze locked on the door handle. But it stayed still. Locked. Secure. But the whisper never stopped, a slow, thick murmur that seemed to wrap around her, pressing against her ears. Debra squeezed her eyes shut, her fingers trembling. "It's not real, it's just my mind, just a bad dream," she whispered. But the whisper grew louder, a slow, heavy murmur that rose and fell, an unintelligible chorus clawing at the thin door. Her breath quickened, her gaze darting to the mirror. Her reflection was pale, ghostly, her wide eyes staring back. But then something else, a faint, dark shape behind her, tall, twisted, fading into the fogged glass. She spun, but the bathroom was empty. Her breath came in rapid, ragged gasps, the cold air pressing against her throat. The whisper never stopped, a low, thick rasp that seemed to press against the door, multiple voices, a distorted, tangled chorus. Her fingers clawed at the cold tiles, her voice a desperate plea. "Please, please go away." But the whisper only grew louder, desperate, the muffled voices rising, twisting around her. The light overhead flickered again, the pale glow trembling. Debra's reflection blurred, her pale, wide eyes flickering in and out. But as the light steadied, she saw it, something in the mirror. The fog swirled, twisting, and the shadow appeared again, tall, crooked, leaning over her reflection. Its face was a pale, distorted smear, eyes dark and hollow, twisting as though straining against the glass. Her breath caught, and she spun, but the bathroom was empty. She stumbled back, her gaze locked on the mirror. The shape twisted, clawed hands pressing against the glass, but the reflection remained a pale, fogged blur. The whisper was a faint, frantic chorus now, pressing against the door. Her fingers fumbled for the cabinet, pulling it open, grabbing anything, makeup brushes, a toothbrush, anything to feel less helpless. But then the light flickered, and in the brief darkness, the shadow in the mirror seemed to press closer. The whisper rose, a frantic, distorted moan that clawed at the door. The handle twisted sharply, a loud, violent rattle. Debra screamed, stumbling back, her fingers slipping against the cold tiles. The lock held, but the handle shook, twisted, and then slammed against the door. "Michael! Please!" she screamed, her voice cracking. But the house was silent, the darkness beyond the door an empty void. The whisper became a frantic, garbled roar, still unintelligible, but desperate, clawing at the door, a twisted, overlapping chorus of faint, distorted voices. The mirror's fog thickened, her own pale reflection barely visible. But the shadow was there, tall, twisted, pressing against the glass, clawed fingers raking against the mist. The light flickered wildly, the shadows twisting across the walls. The handle shook violently, but the lock held, the metal bolt trembling. Her pulse was a frantic, painful hammer in her chest. And then the whisper changed, fainter, thinner, like a chorus fading into the distance. The door handle fell still. Silence. Debra's chest heaved, her pulse a faint, rapid flutter. The silence pressed against her ears, thick and smothering. Her eyes stayed locked on the door, still, the pale light beneath it a thin, steady line. But something was wrong. The air was too cold, her breath a faint, visible mist. Her gaze flicked to the mirror, but the fog was gone. Her reflection was clear, pale, wide-eyed, hair tangled. But behind her, the shadow remained, tall, twisted, its clawed fingers pressed against the glass. Debra's voice was a thin, trembling whisper. It's still." The lights went out. Total darkness. Her breath came in short, desperate gasps. She scrambled for her phone, but the screen was dead, cold beneath her fingers. Then a faint, soft glow, her phone screen, flickering to life. But the time was wrong, 5:30 a.m. Then it changed, 5:31. 5:32. The numbers spun faster, twisting, blurring. The light overhead flickered back on. Her reflection was gone. But the shadow was still there, pressed against the glass, its dark, clawed fingers twisted, its pale, empty face straining against the fogged surface. A slow, distorted whisper echoed, thick, faint, clawing at the walls. But then it stopped. Silence. The door handle twisted one last time, slow, deliberate. And then, with a soft, sharp click, the lock released. The door swung open, the darkness beyond a thick, cold void. The world outside the restroom was gone, just a void of empty black. Debra's breath froze, her legs refusing to move. And in the empty doorway, the darkness seemed to creep forward, silent and yearning. It hungered for the taste of fear on its lips. Next time you're home all alone, and you hear those things that go bump in the night, sometimes they are best left alone.